Okay, welcome to this video podcast of respiration and what is it and what is it not. When most people think of respiration, they think of breathing. Well, this might be part of respiration, but it's not really the concept of respiration. So what is respiration then? So respiration is defined as the process of converting the energy stored in food into a more useful form that cells can use. When the Regents refers to organic food, what they're talking about is glucose. So we need to take a closer look at what glucose looks like and where the energy is stored in it and how much energy is stored in glucose, one molecule. If you take a look at glucose, you can see that there are quite a bit of bonds that hold glucose together. And those bonds are in between the atoms. So here's a bond, there's a bond, 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 bond. So we break these bonds in chemical reactions and we release the energy. So when glucose is made in photosynthesis, we learned that the other day, that the energy from the sun is actually converted into a chemical energy, and that chemical energy is stored in these bonds between the atoms. So this is a bond, and that's where the energy is. So energy stored. So if you remember from biochemistry that more bonds, if a molecule has more bonds, a bigger molecule, it generally has more energy stored in the molecule. So don't forget that this molecule of glucose, we write the chemical formula, so you'll see this next in our formula of formula of respiration, is C6H12O6. That's if you were able to count up all the atoms within that molecule. But this is the molecular formula, and that just shows us what atoms are in the molecule, as opposed to our structural formula over here to the left, which actually shows us all the bonds and the energy stored. Okay, so let's take a look at what the respiration formula looks like so we can see what the end products are going to be, and then we can compare and contrast what aerobic respiration is and anaerobic respiration. Okay, so we start with this big molecule, which we already know is glucose. And so we're going to label this as glucose. So we know. So we need a molecule of glucose. And we need to add oxygen. Okay, so oxygen, 6 molecules of oxygen. And label that oxygen. Okay, so, then what we're going to have is some waste products. So we have CO2 from the breakup of glucose. We have 6 molecules of those. And we have water, 6H2O. And then we have something very important, which is going to be our energy currency. And what our cells actually use is ATP. Stands for adenosine triphosphate. And then what this is, it's aerobic respiration. And one thing we're going to need to know is you get 36 ATP out from that. So that's going to be our energy. So I'm going to put in parentheses, energy. But it is actually a molecule that stores the energy. Okay, I rewrote the formula for respiration, and you can definitely see that over on the left-hand side are what are called reactants. So we need to label those. Okay, and then on the left-hand side, here, we have products. you can see that carbon dioxide, we consider that to be a waste product, something we have to excrete from our lungs, collected by the lungs from the blood, and excreted by exhaling. But again, we want that ATP for cellular use, for them to use for their daily processes and their life functions. Okay, so another concept that we need to know is, where does respiration occur? What we talk about that is, where does it occur within a cell? So I just drew into these organelles where it might occur, and what do they say? They say that they are the mighty mitochondria. Okay, so there's mitochondria. And one thing you should know is that if I have one of them, it is called a mitochondrion. If I have more than one, if I'm talking about all the ones in a cell, we say it's a mitochondria. Same thing, just one is singular, one is plural. And I just drew a larger mitochondrion outside of the cell, but they're normally found within the cytoplasm. And I wanted to point out the folds within the mitochondria. Not that you need to know this for your test, but those folds are called cristae. Cristae is where the chemical reactions within the mitochondria for cellular respiration actually occur. It contains enzymes that help this reaction occur faster, and that's where the glucose is actually broken down into carbon dioxide, and energy is being released into form of ATP. So this part of the video, I want to talk about more about ATP, which is over here. ATP is that energy currency that cells use for their everyday processes. So what does ATP stand for? So adenosine triphosphate. So ATP, adenosine triphosphate, or tri meaning three. So it has three phosphate molecules attached to a adenosine molecule, or part of the molecule. So what do we have here? We have a simple molecular formula of adenosine triphosphate. And basically what you need to know is that this portion of it is called an adenine molecule. Adenine. And then we have over here, from here to here, is your ribose. Your ribose, and you should know OSC, is a sugar, and that portion, both the adenine and the ribose, if we look at all of this, is what's called adenosine. Those two combined together, adenosine. And then we have our three phosphates. Okay, three phosphates molecules, and that makes up the adenosine triphosphate. And the other thing you have to know is that the energy that's converted from glucose to adenosine triphosphate is stored in the bonds, these high energy bonds between the phosphates. So right there and right there and even there, we have high energy bonds. So when the cell needs some energy and it breaks the bond within the phosphate, then you will break off a phosphate and energy will then be released. So what happens when a cell needs some energy? Well, we start with this adenosine triphosphate, this ATP, and what has to happen is it breaks off, like I said, one of these bonds here. So it'll break that phosphate off, and what you're going to wind up with is adenosine you're going to wind up with adenosine with two phosphates, and that's called ADP, or adenosine diphosphate. And now you have a separate phosphate out there, and what is released? Well, energy is released. So, energy. So now the cell can use that energy for daily processes, because you broke it and it was stored in this bond between these two phosphates, this one and this one, and we got the energy out, and that's where this energy came from. This was stored between those two molecules of the phosphates. Okay, well, a couple other things is, why does this cell do this conversion between glucose to ATP? If we look back at our formula, is why does it go from the energy stored in glucose to the energy stored in ATP? And the answer is you get this glucose is one very large molecule, which is a lot of energy stored in it. Where if we have now a currency that's smaller, 36 ATP out of that, you have 36 units of energy now that you can use for all of your different processes. So it's not going to use all the energy and glucose up in one process. So to make it smaller, and make it more useful, our cells convert the energy from glucose into ATP so that it's smaller and more usable. And the last thing is we need to talk about is the difference between aerobic and anaerobic respiration. Well, aerobic respiration uses oxygen, and results in 36 ATP from one molecule of glucose. Anaerobic respiration does not use oxygen, and results in only 2 ATP from one molecule of glucose. Molecule. Sorry about that. Whoops. So to sum it up, anaerobic respiration does not get out as much ATP from the same molecule of glucose. Anaerobic respiration does not go through all the same processes to get out as much energy as you can. So basically, just split glucose in half, and it's called glycolysis, and you get that 2 ATP out from there. Whereas anaerobic respiration, you go through its whole electron transport chain, where you're going to get a lot more ATP out. So it's much more efficient, aerobic, and it's what we usually use in complex organisms. Okay, I hope that you've learned something about respiration, and I hope to see you in class.